Hi everyone. Listen, I'm as upset as you are. If you're new here, last week I read Fourth Wing and I loved it. I gave it a glowing review. In fact, I talked about it for like an hour and really didn't have that much negative to say. And I had heard that fans of the series did not think that Iron Flame was as good as Fourth Wing, but I feel like in fantasy romance series, it's really hard to do a sequel because in the contemporary world, you rarely do sequels to romances, and if you do, usually it's a romance between two friends of the original characters. It's not more about the characters from the original romance. So when you write a romance novel that's also a fantasy series that has more going on than just the romance, and you want to write multiple books, it can sometimes be very hard to write a sequel because what do you do with the romance in the second book? And so when the last book kind of ended with the couple on the rocks a little bit, my assumption was that they sort of went through the whole enemies to lovers process again, and that was why people were frustrated with it because they wanted to just read them happily together with the rest of the plot going on. So that's not, I think, why people didn't like the second book very much, or at least that's not why I didn't like it very much. And I want to be super clear here. It's not that I think that this book is terrible. I just think that Rebecca Yarros set such a high bar with Fourth Wing that coming after it with a book like Iron Flame was just gonna be disappointing. It's just not at the quality level that Fourth Wing was, and that's why it feels so much worse than it maybe actually is as a book. So I just want to be super clear here up front. It's not that I hated this book or that I thought it was horrible. It's more just that she set a standard for herself that she then did not match, and that made it a disappointing read. So with that established, we're going to go through my spoiler-free feelings first. So if you've read the first one, you're thinking about picking up the second, I will be sure to warn you when we're going to dive into spoilers. Overarchingly, my feeling was that this book really struggled with its pacing. I feel like we spent a lot of time watching scenes that weren't as impactful to the actual narrative, and the scenes that were more impactful to the narrative throughout the book tended to be a little shorter. It was too long. To put it simply, a book can be as long as the author deems that it actually needs to be. So books that are, sometimes 1,000 pages, 1,200 pages don't feel like they're too long if the author makes good use of that page space. In my opinion, this book did not make good use of its page space. We spent a lot of time in scenes that weren't really as relevant to the plot, and parts of it were very repetitive, only for the parts that then become very consequential to the plot to happen very quickly, almost rushing us back into scenes that aren't consequential to the plot at all. And that's not necessarily bad. Like, I'm not necessarily somebody who thinks a book has to be entirely plot. We can spend time with the characters just spending time together being themselves and not feel like it's wasted page space. But in order for that to be the case, then that page space has to not feel wasted. You have to make those scenes like entertaining or interesting in some way. And so I think it was the combination of the number of scenes that we got that didn't feel relevant to the plot with the supposed urgency behind what the characters needed to be doing that led to moments where I was like, we don't have time for this. Like there's all this stuff happening and you guys have to get these things done in order to, like, I don't want to spoil anything obviously, but it's like there's things they have to do and they sort of have these deadlines for when they have to do them by. And so when you spend that much time with them in these casual scenes where they're more just like conversing or like learning things at the Dragon College or whatever it might be, as a reader, it just becomes very challenging to like care about those scenes or take them seriously. I'm assuming a lot here. I'm jumping to a lot of conclusions. We don't know why this is, but in my humble opinion, I think that most likely this book was rushed. Now, was it rushed by the author or was it rushed by the publisher? I don't know. I feel like this is part of what leads to this idea of the curse of the sequel and this idea that sequels almost never end up as good as their original books. So when an author sells a series, they sell usually the first completed manuscript along with the idea for approximately how many books they want to do and approximately what they want to do in each book. It's not a commitment, but it's more just saying, okay, I want to write a 3-book series. Here's the manuscript for book 1, and this is like kind of the direction I want the series to go. And a publisher might buy just the first book. They might buy the series. And if they buy the series, what then ends up happening is you have deadlines to turn in those other manuscripts. And I think what can sometimes happen to authors is if you're working on a manuscript just in your free time, you can spend years sometimes working on that manuscript before selling it. And so then if you end up in a situation where you're on like a year and a half timeline to turn in a manuscript for another book, maybe you've never written a book that quickly, maybe that affects the quality of it a little bit. Another possibility is that she thought she had longer to work on it, and maybe once the first book was super successful, the publisher was like, oh, hang on a minute, we want to get the second book out a lot quicker than we originally thought because the series is hot and people like it. And so she thought she had more time to work on it, and then she was rushed to finishing the book. Or it was poor time management and she ended up rushed towards the end of working on the book because she kind of put off working on it. It could have been any of those three things, but the reason that I think that it probably had to do with the amount of time that she had to work on the book is because this very much felt like a draft to me, specifically because there were so many scenes that seemed so repetitive and not always consequential to the plot. Again, it works differently for every author and I don't want to like assume her process or anything, but if you look, there is kind of like this overarching agreement that your first draft isn't even going to make any sense. So it's just getting the story out there. Maybe the plot generally follows a plot line, maybe it doesn't. But like if you read it front to back and you didn't know what you had in your head as the author, that the book literally wouldn't make any sense. And draft 2 is when you make it make sense and you put it in the order it needs to be in. And then draft 3 is when you cut the fluff and make it flow and add the symbolism and all of that sort of stuff. And this very much felt like a draft 2 to me. It felt like she got it to a place where the story made sense from front to back and then went, okay, book's done, and never went through and actually edited out maybe some chapters that she didn't need, or like saw maybe where she was kind of repeating herself or something like that. So that's why my assumption is that it was rushed, because I feel like she showed us with the first book that she would take the time to do that if she had the time to do that, because the first book didn't have a pacing problem at all. So to go from the quality of the first book to the quality of the second book, it genuinely kind of feels like they're written by different authors. And again, I don't say that to say that this second book is horrible. I just mean that like the quality drop off from the first to the second is a large one. And the first one was really, really good. And the second book I would not consider to be good. I don't know how to describe, like I'm trying to think of how I would feel in isolation. Like if I read this book by itself and I had not read the first one and I wasn't like expecting a certain quality level, where would I rank it? And I think I would rank it on like the low end of mediocre, which to go from probably one of my favorite fantasy romances I've ever read. The Serpent and the Wings of Night is my favorite fantasy romance. Fourth Wing took that second slot. So to go from that level of quality in a book to a book that I would consider like below average, that just leads me to believe that there was something in the production of this book that led to that quality drop off that isn't necessarily due to the author's skill, but maybe with the process or how much time they had or whatever it might be. Who knows? But to summarize my thoughts, the book needed to be edited a lot more than it was. I often found myself frustrated with how many scenes in a row we were getting of seemingly the same interaction or the same thing. And sometimes the characters' like motivations or actions just like didn't make a whole lot of sense given what we were being told was going on. And so it was a big disappointment because I did really like that first one. So that is my spoiler-free review. I'm sorry. I wish I could be more positive. I really don't like giving negative reviews on this channel. It makes me feel mean. But I read the first book and I told you guys I was going to tell you how I felt about the second book, and here we are. Have you guys read this? How did you feel about it? I know that the second book is broadly considered to not be as good as the first, but I don't know if people were as frustrated by it as I was. So let me know if you've read it. Did you feel the same way? Did you feel like the pacing was really off? That's going to be all for me on spoiler free. So if you don't want the book spoiled, now would be the time to click out of the video. I appreciate you a lot, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, let's break it down. I'm not going to break down the plot of this one the way that I did the last book, where I went really in depth and I kind of gave you my thoughts throughout the book, because I feel like this book more had overarching things that I want to talk about. So I'm just kind of going to throw the general plot at you all at once here at the beginning so that you have context for when I'm referencing things later on, and then I'll dive into kind of the overarching things in the book that were frustrating to me. So if you remember, at the end of the last book, Violet had just found out that she had been lied to her whole life. She had been told that these venom creatures, which are humans who pull magic magic directly from the source, directly from the earth, as opposed to using a conduit like a dragon or a griffin. They end up like super evil and corrupt, and they just want to like take all the magic on earth, including the magic from the dragons and the griffins, and basically wipe out all the humans and just have a whole like venin society where they pull magic straight from the ground. And that Navarre, the country that Violet is from, has these wards that make it so that the only magic that can happen on their land is dragon magic. And so they've convinced all of their people that these venin creatures are folklore, they don't actually exist, they're not real, and nobody's even aware of the fact that this like war is going on beyond their borders. All they know is that there's this other country called Port-Emil that keeps attempting to invade them, and they have no idea why. They're like, oh my gosh, if they just like stopped invading us, like we wouldn't have a war. Like our country isn't doing anything wrong. And Violet and Xaden, who's the love interest, and their squad are put in this situation where they have to choose between saving this village from venin or going to their other war games assignment and turning their back on the village. And it's a test of loyalty. Basically, the school is trying to see if they will actually turn their back on these people, concede to the Navarrian way that they don't need to help others and that they just need to focus on keeping themselves safe. Then Violet is gravely injured in the battle, so they have to take her to Eurasia, which is the kind of fortress where they're doing this rebellion from, to heal her, and they tell her about all of this, and she feels super betrayed and she's really mad at Xaden, but she agrees to help the cause. So that is where the last book ended. Now let's get into the new book. So long story short, the squad goes back to Basgiath, the dragon school. This plot point makes little to no sense to me for layers of reasons, but they end up doing this. They go back to the school, they lie their way back in. Apparently very few people knew about the whole venin thing, so they're able to have a public confrontation and get their narrative of what happened out there so that nobody suspects that they know about the venin or that they're doing a rebellion or anything. And Colonel Ados, who's Dane's dad, is one of the only people who knows that they know about the venin and that they had this whole venin battle and all that. So he gets banished from the school. He's mad about it. He keeps sending assassins to kill all of the people that were on this mission. Xaden gets sent on assignment, which is about a day's ride away because he graduated. He was a third year in the first book. His dragon and Violet's dragon are mated, so they have to see each other every so often or it causes them literal physical pain. But with the distance, this means that it's an event for them to see each other. So they're given leave to go kind of alternate once a week to visit each other. Whereas if Xaden had been stationed closer, they could have seen each other all the time and their dragons could have hung out all the time. I just realized you can totally see, I had to point the light at the wall because it was a little too bright, and you can like 100% see the outline of the actual light in my TV. Just ignore that. I'm still figuring out how to set up all this new equipment, okay? Forgive me. Anyway, then we just get a lot of Violet at the dragon school, and at some point she decides, oh, you know what? I'm gonna hunt in the archives for if there's any information about how they got the wards up so that we can maybe put the wards up in Eurasia, because they have a ward stone, they just don't have wards. So this first half of the book is her really focused on figuring that out from the archives. She has some help from her fellow squad mates that were on the mission with them. And then they find out about the existence of these secret journals from some of the early dragon riders. They break into the archives, they steal the journals. They get caught. Xaden manages to escape with one of the journals, but Violet gets tortured by this guy Varish. And then eventually Xaden saves her, and they tell the whole entire school about the whole venin thing, and they take half the school with them to Eurasia. That is the end of part 1. In part 2, Violet tries to translate the journal, and her first attempt is not successful, and so they don't have the wards up yet. But in the meantime, they also need to get one of these luminary things so they can make the weapons that can kill the venin. Venin can only be killed in a select few ways. You either have to have one of these like kind of magical knives, or you can kill them with lightning, which is Violet's superpower. Like, she can cast lightning, so she's very valuable, obviously. There's this guy who has a luminary, and he says that he'll open negotiations with them if he can see Violet cast her lightning. At first, Xaden is really against going to see him because he's super dangerous, but Violet just kind of leaves without him and goes to do it, so Xaden catches up with her and is like, okay, fine, I guess we're doing this. The guy makes Violet fight a venin in front of them, which is a really cool battle scene, but then they sit down to do the negotiations. They agree to take the luminary back as well as a bunch of the flyer cadets. So those are the Griffin Riders. So now we've got a bunch of Griffin Riders and a bunch of Dragon Riders who are all training at Eurasia together to become soldiers to help fight the venin. Eventually, Violet figures out how to put the wards up at Eurasia. They manage to get them up enough that the wyvern that try to fly through, the venin have like wyvern instead of dragons. When they fly through the barrier, they end up passing out, but they don't quite die, but the venin don't realize that the wyvern aren't quite dead, and so they turn around and leave. But then Violet and squad realize that the the wards are not like up all the way and there's still something kind of wrong with them. And then they find out that the Venin were working on this grand plan to take the wards down at Bosgioth and to be able to go drain the magic from the hatching grounds there for the dragons. So they go to protect Bosgioth and the dragon hatching grounds there, and they end up in this big showdown with the Venin. And near the end, Violet finds out that the reason that the wards didn't work before is because they need a 7th type of dragon. And they thought there were only 6, but it turns out that Indarna, her second dragon, is this like fancy special dragon, and that she seemingly waited in her egg for Violet to be born and like heard the elders kind of talking about Violet and was like, oh, that's gonna be my rider, and like chose to hatch for Violet. And so they're able to get the wards back up for Bosgioth, but not before Xaden turns himself Venin in order to protect Violet from another Venin that's like attacking him, that says like, once I'm done killing you, I'm gonna go kill Violet, and he's about to die. But whatever, he ends up becoming Venin, and the book ends with him finding out from Jack, who was the big bad in the last book. He was like the big jerk guy. Turns out he turned Venin in the last book at some point, and we find that out in this book, and he's the one who took down the wards. He tells Xaden there's no cure, you're gonna be like this for the rest of your life, you're always gonna crave power from the earth, you're never going to be able to get away from it, and eventually you're going to become corrupt as a result. You will lose your soul, basically. And that is the end of the book. So you might be thinking, Meredith, that all sounds fine. What was your problem with it? Again, my problem wasn't necessarily with the plot itself and the events of the plot. My problem was with the pacing and how much time we spent watching certain things and in certain areas as opposed to others. So let me start to break this down. I understand that the first book really was about a dragon school. The focus of book 1 in this series was Violet surviving this very deadly dragon riders college. And so we were spending a lot of time in classes, but a lot of that class time was spent explaining to the reader certain things about the world. So we got a lot of world building through what the students were being taught in the classes. And it was interspersed with a lot of combat training and a lot of learning how to fly on the dragons and, you know, actually matching with the dragons and all of that. So it was interspersed with a lot of these action sequences that helped kind of move you through the monotony of a college lecture. Because if you think about it, a college lecture scene isn't like the most engaging scene for a reader, but like I said, we're getting world building in them, we're learning cool things about the dragon riders, and we're getting it interspersed with these other scenes that break it up so that it doesn't feel so monotonous. And the focus of the whole entire book is Violet surviving the dragon school, so all of it feels relevant to the plot. In this book, we have basically none of the things that I just said to help us through the monotony of these college scenes. There's very little combat training or flight training or anything that we see the cadets going through, because at this point they're second years, so they're kind of just watching the first years go through a lot of that. So a lot of the scenes where they're actually in the combat room where they learn like hand-to-hand fighting, they're just watching the first years and interacting with the first year, so they themselves aren't fighting, so it's still like spectator description. Instead of even breaking it up with like descriptions of flight maneuvers or anything, one of their classes that they're taking is this like land navigation thing where they get paired up with a bunch of cadets from all the other wings of the army, and then they all have to like navigate with a map, like a land area. But the scene that we see this super in-depth in is just them like getting lost in the woods. So it's still just all the characters like having conversations, but they're lost in the woods. And potentially we could have broken up the monotony of some of this with some visits between Violet and Xaden, but they're fighting for a lot of the visits that we actually see them have, and they actually aren't able to see each other that often with some of the visits. And so we don't really get a lot of scenes of them interacting. And again, this would be fine. Like, I'm not somebody who needs plot. But if what I'm watching is a conversation, then something about the conversation has to offer some interest to me. It can't be just like the same thing over and over and over again. Part of what was happening in this kind of first section is that Violet is really struggling with lying to her friends. What we end up experiencing as the reader is the same scene over and over and over and over and over again. They're in class, somebody asks Violet a question, she can't answer directly, she has to lie to her friends, she feels bad, her friends start to tell that she's lying, she feels bad. Now we're in land navigation, we're out wandering in the wilderness, somebody Somebody asks her a question she can't answer directly. She's a bad liar. Her friends know she's lying. She feels guilty about lying. Now they're in combat class. They're watching Sloane. She's bad at fighting. Violet's worried about the fact that she's bad at fighting. Somebody asks her a question she can't give them the direct answer to, and she has to lie, and then she feels bad about lying, and her friends know she's lying over and over and over. It's the same scene. It's the same scene, and it just keeps happening. No matter where they are, what they're doing is having a conversation, and somewhere in that conversation, Violet has to omit a truth or lie, and then she feels guilty about it, and she's slowly fracturing her friendships as a result, and it just happens again and again and again and again and again and again. Do you see what I'm saying? To top it all off, we're not actually getting that much explanation from the professors of like the new things they're supposedly supposed to be learning. All of the focus of these scenes is on the fracturing of specifically the relationship between Violet and Rhiannon, and that is kind of the focus of this first part, but that's literally all we see. And not only that, like I said, the focus of the first book is Violet surviving the Dragon College, but the focus of the second book is that they think they only have about 6 months to a year before the Venin are going to launch a major assault. They don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but they think they have around 6 months to a year. So now we have this major time constraint that is not focused on the school itself or anything they're supposed to be learning at the school. So we're getting a lot of scenes in the school. We're getting a lot of scenes of her kind of fighting with her friends. We're getting a lot of scenes of her fighting with Xaden, and none of it feels relevant to this like giant pressing thing that supposedly is what the book is about. I wonder if she was just hesitant to let go of the idea of this book or the series as a series about this dragon college, but you were the one who nuked that idea. You were the one who introduced this broader thing, and now it's not about them surviving the dragon college, it's about them fighting this continent-wide war. So then when you take us back to the dragon college, of course we're not going to care as much about the classes. There's other stuff going on. They don't have time for this. And yes, she's like trying to read these books out of the archives, but obviously we can't be like shown her reading a book in depth, or that would be boring too. So we just keep getting told that she's reading these books in the archives to help look for this ward solution, and she's not finding it. And to top it all off, just the icing on the cake of this first part is that Xaden isn't in that much of it because he's stationed away, and the professors are kind of suspicious that he and her are up to something, so they're like sort of trying to keep them apart. And so even when they're able to kind of visit each other's locations, they aren't always able to see each other. Even with her only seeing him like once a week, we get very few scenes with him. The romance hero in a fantasy romance. And he's like, I'm not joking, barely in the book. I probably spent 4 or 5 hours reading this book the first night I read it, and all I read was school and fights with friends. That was it. 4 or 5 hours worth of reading, and that was all it was. Only to then the next day read over lunch, read for like an hour, and in that hour, they break into the archives, they get the journals, they get caught, Violet gets tortured, Xaden breaks her out, and then they get the rest of the students to fly with them to Erasia. So we had like 4 or 5 hours of reading where basically nothing happened, and then we had an hour of reading where everything happened, and then the part ended. And I just was like, okay, well now I don't know how to feel, because some stuff happened in there that I was interested in, but it was all like right at the tail end. So hopefully this next part will continue along the line of how this part ended, and surely we're gonna get away from the dragon classes because we're not at the dragon college anymore, and surely Xaden's gonna be in more of the book because he's not on assignment anymore, right? Surely we're not just gonna have a whole other part that's a lot of the same thing, right? Wrong. The cadets are not full dragon riders yet. They don't know everything they need to know to be successful dragon riders. Makes sense. They don't waste classes at Basgiath. So you guys don't know some things that you need to know to be full dragon riders. So we're actually going to continue the dragon school here at Erasia so you can continue your classes. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with this asterisk. The asterisk is, I don't have a problem with them sticking to the classes that are actually 100% relevant to the war. But do you have any idea how frustrating it is to be reading a scene where our main character Violet is talking about how she doesn't have that much time to work on translating the journal that potentially has the key to them putting up these wards that's going to stop these super evil venom things from coming in, I don't know, killing all of them, because she's studying for physics. Physics isn't going anywhere. You can learn E equals MC squared at any stage in life, really. Does she really need to know that right now? And to be fair to the author, it's not that we were watching her in history class or watching her in physics class, thank God, but the fact that the character canonically is still taking these classes when she has to translate this journal that's, I don't know, going to save their whole entire fortress from an untimely demise at the hands of these super evil magic wielders? Yes, it's just a casual mention, but doesn't she have better things to do? And not only that, but she is the only soldier they have that is capable of killing the venom with her bare hands. Everybody else needs one of these knives to kill the venom. And there's this whole scene where she's told, oh, they weren't teaching you your magic right, they were just trying to turn you into a mass destroyer. We're going to teach you how to control it so you're a lot more effective on the battlefield. So we've established that she needs to learn how to control her magic better. In fact, we've seen in the last book a battle where she wasn't as effective as she wanted to be and people died because she didn't have control over her magic. So the character herself has a lot of motivation to hone her magic. And there are these teachers that are saying to her, hey, you need to hone your magic. And there's this journal that she needs to translate so that she can put up the wards so that they don't all die. So why is she in a physics class? Why is she taking history? Why is she talking about these things? Even some of the other more relevant dragon classes ended up starting to wear on me because it just felt so ridiculous and absurd that they would have her doing any of this with this war going on and her specifically being so important to their potential of winning it. And then you want to talk about a pacing problem. When they go and they try to get the luminary from the guy, the whole reason he's supposedly dangerous is because he's this crazy negotiator. He knows your heart's desire, he knows what you truly want, and he can offer you something you can't refuse. And so you have to be very, very careful because you can think that you outsmart him, but he almost always ends up winning his negotiations and getting what he wants. And not only that, but there's all these hints dropped that he will hold you to anything you commit to and the exact verbiage of whatever that is. So there's all this buildup of him being this incredible businessman and this incredible negotiator, and that's why he's dangerous. They get there, they do the venom battle thing. That part was cool. I'm not complaining about that. But then they actually sit down to have the negotiation. I am not joking when I tell you that the actual conversation for the negotiation could not have lasted more than like 5 or 6 IRL pages. I was reading it on my Kindle, so it was more like 15, but the Kindle pages are really small in comparison to pages in a real book. This supposed master negotiator makes one offer, one single offer, that Xaden and Violet are obviously going to refuse, I might add, because he basically offers them peace. So he offers them an island where they can go and live with their loved ones and live in peace away from all of the war and all that if Violet works for him as a personal bodyguard for like 3 years. And they're like, well, first of all, nobody's lasting 3 years anyway. The venom are going to kill everybody. And second, even if we did escape before the venom killed everybody, we obviously would feel super guilty about abandoning the continent. And eventually the venom would come for us anyway, even if we were on an island. So obviously they're going to refuse that because it's not actually an offer of peace. It wouldn't actually work out that way. And the guy basically is like, well, all right, you've foiled my master plot. I guess I'll just give you this luminary if you promise to take all the flyers with you and train them as well, and then give me a certain number of the weapons. Swear to God, swear to God. And that's just like the end of the scene. There was all this buildup. There's all this tension. Xaden doesn't want her to go. It's too dangerous. There's all this time that we spend watching her fly there, meeting this character Kat, who we'll get to, because I got problems with Kat too. Then doing the whole venom battle thing. I don't know, there was so much buildup to this negotiation that could not have been a bigger letdown as a climax to all of it. Especially if you're gonna have her like battle a venom right before that, you have to make that negotiation very intense for that to be the climax of that whole thing. So it's clear that she intended the venom battle to be the climax of this kind of mini subplot in the middle of this book. Why would you spend all this time building backing up, emphasizing how dangerous this guy is in negotiation, if you're going to make it so that the actual dangerous thing is that he's going to make Violet battle this venom to even be considered as a part of the negotiations. Like, that doesn't match what you've been building the scene up to be. So it feels like a letdown because I was led to believe this negotiation was going to be insane. And that's what I mean about, like, I don't need plot, I don't need action for the scene to be interesting. Like, a negotiation scene could be very interesting if I, the reader, don't know what Violet is going to do. If he actually offered her something that she was considering taking, and her and Xaden are maybe like fighting about it in their minds with their like mind speak, and she's trying to like wordsmith her way out of things, and maybe she kind of accidentally commits to pieces of it without realizing, and so then she's stuck to some of the stuff she's already committed to, and she's trying to figure out how to like stop herself from committing to more, but she maybe still wants to take his whole deal. Like, that scene could have been so fascinating, but instead it literally was like, do you want an island? No. Okay, that's all I got. So if you don't want that, I guess we'll just negotiate in good faith. What? Then there's this tiny detail I left out of my plot summary. There's something I didn't tell you, okay? They get back to Eratia, and I'm not joking. Violet is so defeated by her failed attempt to put up the wards before they left that she does not touch the journal, does not even attempt to translate the journal for multiple months. She just lets it sit there because she's like, well, I didn't get it the first time. Even if that's what she wanted, I don't think anybody else in this organization would have let her do that. Hey, girlie, let's maybe get on the translating. Let's get these wards up. But it doesn't feel accurate to her character. Like, her whole thing is that she's supposed to be supremely resilient. She's failed a lot in her life, and she spent her whole life training to be a scribe. You spent your whole life training to be a scribe, and then you give up a translation because you were wrong once? Anybody who knows anything about dead languages will tell you they are very difficult to translate. You would think that she would understand that it's a possibility that she's not going to get it right the first time. They're going to try something and she's going to have to take another crack at it. Like, why? How is it that she failed so much in the first book and she went through so much physical pain and mental pain in the first book and was so resilient, and even in the first half of this book was like fully tortured and was so resilient, only to get defeated by a dead language journal? Like, this is what breaks her? This is what makes her feel like defeated? I can't do this? It's just, it's absurd. It's outrageous. And we are told that she's working on her magic, but we don't see it that much in this part. Instead, what we see is more dragon school. Yay! And again, I just found myself thinking, they have her working on her magic, but why are we not seeing more of that as the reader? Because that's more relevant to what's going on than all these random other dragon classes. But like, why is she not working on this journal translation? And it's especially frustrating because this led to the introduction of this character, Kat. There is something that this author has a tendency to do with her villain characters specifically that I didn't really harp on in my first video because I was just kind of cracking jokes about it. I was like, oh yeah, you know, they just kind of exist to be jerks. They're assholes. Like, their whole personality is being an ass, and that's all they offer. I just kind of said it as a bit because it didn't bother me in the first book because those characters just weren't in that many scenes, and their negative interactions with the main character were usually pretty short. So as ridiculous, you know, what a TV writer thinks a high school mean girl is like, esque those interactions were, it was easy to shrug off because it would be like a few sentences and then the book would move on. Not now. So Kat is this book's resident jerk character. She exists in the book to be a jerk. All she is a jerk. She has zero other personality traits besides big jerk. That's all she has to offer. She was betrothed to Xaden for political reasons, but that betrothal fell apart because, I don't know, for some reason the betrothal fell apart. So even before Violet came into the picture, Xaden wasn't going to marry Kat. But Kat really wants Xaden's crown. She really wants the power that comes with being his wife. So she hates Violet because she views Violet as her obstacle to rekindling this thing with Xaden and going back to being betrothed to him. And so every single scene they're in together, Kat is openly hostile towards Violet in a way that's just like, even if you despise somebody, even if this is the person you hate the most in this world, if you had to interact with them as often as Kat and Violet are interacting with each other throughout this whole thing, like, it's just not realistic. Nobody behaves like that in real life. And it's pages and pages and pages every single time of just back and forth between them of Kat being rude and Violet kind of sticking it to her and having her own sassy moments and them getting in arguments and getting in fights, and just every word out of Kat's mouth is rude to Violet, and it's like she literally exclusively exists in this book to be mean to Violet, and that is it. She has no further deeper personality traits than that alone. And it's the same with Jack from the first book. It's just that he wasn't in as much of the book as Kat's in this one, so it didn't bother me as much. And to top it all off, Xaden's in no more of this second part than he is in the first. I'm not joking when I tell you, I think that Violet spent more time arguing with Kat than she spent interacting with Xaden. I would for sure say in this part, but I would speculate that even in the whole entire book, she argues with Kat more than she has any interaction with Xaden. Scene after scene after scene of them in these dragon classes that I sort of don't think Violet should be bothering with because she has better stuff to do, but she's so defeated on the whole journal thing that we're not even told that she's trying outside of the classes. She's just completely ignoring it. And scene after scene after scene of these dragon classes where we're either watching a college lecture, which is like a boring thing to witness, dare I say it, or we're just watching Violet and Kat argue. And that's it. The second half of this book is 95% Violet and Kat arguing and dragon lessons. Rebecca, we don't have time for this. The Venin are coming. There's a whole war going on. Like, why are we spending so much time on this? I don't care about Kat. I get it. Kat doesn't like Violet. She wants the crown. Like, why are we doing this? And the craziest part is, in one of the early scenes where her and Kat get in this argument, it really does actually like get to Violet a lot. And part of that is due to Kat's gift, where she's able to like amplify people's emotions. And then she has a whole heart-to-heart with Xaden, where Xaden kind of centers her, you know? And I was like, okay, great. So now she like isn't gonna let Kat under her skin and it's gonna be fine. And then we probably got at least 5 more chapters straight, I would guess, of her just arguing with Kat. And this time it just doesn't get to her the way that it did before. But like, so why are we here? Because this isn't even emotionally affecting Violet anymore. She's just like generally irritated. She's not nearly as like questioning her relationship with Xaden as she was before. So now it's even more pointless because it doesn't even have an emotional impact on our main character. We're just watching Kat be a jerk for no reason. No reason for her to be doing it. No reason for Violet to be putting up with it. No reason for the author to be showing it to us. It's irrelevant. And it's so much of the book. I don't know how to capture to you how much of the book was these two women arguing with each other. It's crazy. And to add insult to injury, we once again have read at least 4 or 5 hours worth of book that are just Dragon School, only for Violet to finally get her head out of her ass and try again to translate the journal. And she gets Dane involved because apparently Dane knows this language too. So like why she wouldn't just give the journal to Dane to take a crack at it, even if she didn't want to do it. Like, it made me more angry once I found out that Dane also speaks this language, because like, why did you not have him do it then if you were like that mad at yourself that you didn't figure it out? Anyway, so her and Dane together end up cracking the translation. I am not shitting you. She sits on that information for 6 days. Canonically, almost a full week, she does not tell anybody that she figured out the translation except for their squad of riders and flyers. Why? Because she wants the flyers to choose whether or not they actually put up the wards, because if they put up the wards, that means the flyers can't cast their magic either. What? I am 100% positive they would rather not have access to their magic than die, because that's literally like, we've been led to believe by Violet's internal monologue that if they don't get the wards up, the Venin could come attack them and just drain all the magic out of the area and kill every single one of them in one go, and they have no defenses. There's no way they'd beat them in an outright battle, so the wards are the only way to save them. But she's saying, well, I don't know if we should put them up because it might upset the flyers. And they haven't even been nice to her. That's the crazy thing. Chapter after chapter after chapter of Kat just being the biggest asshole in the world to her, and she still is like, well, I want you to have access to your magic, so I think I'll just put us all at risk of dying. It just doesn't make sense. And then, it doesn't get better. It doesn't get better, okay? Because Xaden shows back up because he keeps getting sent away for battles. So that's what I mean about him basically not being in the book, is for a lot of the second half, he's like away doing battle stuff. He comes back. He figures out that Violet figured out the wards. She didn't even tell him that. He's like, oh my God, let's go right now. Let's put up the wards, because he's, I don't know, rational. And oh my God, I'm not joking. She's like, no, I have a class assignment I'm about to be late to. My squad's doing a scavenger hunt and they'll get in trouble if I'm not there. So this whole little ward thing is just gonna have to wait, Xaden. Because squads stick together. Squads have each other's backs. And it's sold to us as this whole like girl boss thing of her like standing up to Xaden and being like, no, I'm a rider. I'm a rider first. I'm a rider before I'm anything else. And squads stick together. Bitch, you're an idiot. You are an idiot. This is so, I cannot believe she refuses to go put the wards up with Xaden because she has to do a scavenger hunt with her squad for a class assignment. And then the author has the audacity to then have the Venin be on their way to invade. And so now they have to get the wards up or they're gonna die. And so Violet better have figured it out. She better have gotten it right. Well, boy, howdy. If only you could have known a week ago whether you had gotten it right. And I know, before any of you comment, I know that Violet didn't quite get the word translation right. So the Venin had to be basically right on the border right when they put the wards up and trying to cross like when the wards were freshly up, because they're going to fade over time. And so eventually they wouldn't have been strong enough to have knocked out the Wyvern, and then the Venin would have known that they weren't at full power and they probably would have invaded anyway, or they would have just bided their time and invaded in a few weeks when it had fully faded away. You will never be able to convince me that this was the only series of events that could have led to a situation where the Venin are on their way when Violet's trying to get the wards up. From the bottom of my heart, there are a million combinations of plot events that could have led to that weren't nearly as boneheaded as this. And that's why it was so frustrating, because it's also just so out of character for Violet. Like, her whole strength is supposed to be that she's the clever one. That was like the point of the first book. That was part of what I loved so much about it, is that the author never sacrificed that. She never made Violet way stronger than she should be. You know, she didn't make her magically good at everything in the school. She made her bad at pretty much everything the Dragon Riders were supposed to be doing, but she's able to make her way through the school because she's just so clever. She keeps figuring out other ways to do these things that don't involve physical strength. And that's how she keeps surviving and moving her way forward. Like, her whole thing is supposed to be how clever she is. So why would somebody that clever and that smart do something as stupid as sit on a translation of a journal for literal months and not work on it because they got it wrong one time, and then get it right and sit on it for like a week when they know these Venin things are out there trying to kill them? It makes no sense for her character. It makes no sense for the plot of the book. It was super frustrating to read. Everyone's being so stupid. I don't understand why she's doing any of these dragon scenes. And then once again, all of the exciting stuff happens in the last like 10% of the book. So for both parts of this book, it was like hours and hours of reading of just nothing, only for everything to happen in the last like little bit. And not even in like a we built it all up kind of way, so now all these dominoes are falling. It's more just like that's just how the plot is. Like, nothing happens and then everything happened all at once and there was no reason it needed to be that way. And that's what I mean about the pacing. Like, I genuinely think this book could have been hundreds of pages shorter than it was and have the exact same impact on the reader, if not a better one, because I don't think they would have been nearly as frustrated. I genuinely think that you could cut 90% of the dragon class scenes from this book and the book would be literally exactly the same. I don't know how long the actual physical book is because I read it on my Kindle, like I said, but I would guess it's at least as long as the first one, so it's at least 500 pages, and I only really think it needed to be 300, if even at that. There was just so much wasted time. There was so much time in scenes that didn't matter, and there were so many active decisions by the characters to continue doing these things that didn't matter, but the characters themselves like seemingly don't feel the urgency that we keep getting told by the author is there. And so this is a prime example of show don't tell. Violet's internal monologue keeps telling us that there's all this urgency and that they need to get the wards up and they need to figure out how to kill more Venin, and she needs to hone her magic and they only have so much time to do this, and oh my god, it's so pressing, it's so urgent, it's so pressing, only for all of her behavior to imply that she thinks she has all the time in the world to solve these problems. You can't just tell us that there's urgency. You have to show us the urgency in the characters' actions. And there was no urgency in any of these characters throughout the whole entire book. So then by the end, you just find yourself feeling like they kind of deserved what happened because you could have spent so much time preparing for this and you didn't. You just like fully didn't spend your time working on that stuff. You were doing all this other stuff that didn't matter. And this is where I had so much trouble coming up with the star rating for this book. I ended up giving it a flat 3. It's a 3 out of 5 for me because, again, I don't think it's like necessarily a bad book. It was just such a disappointing book in comparison to the first one. It was below average in my opinion. So maybe I should give it like a 2.5 more. I just feel like so much of the time was wasted. There was so much plot we were given that we just did not need. There were so many dragon classes. Like, why? And so I'm hopeful that in this next book, it gets a little bit better because synopsis is that she has to go on this journey. So I don't know how she would be like continuing her dragon lessons on the journey. But the thing that scares me is that the way that it's worded implies that maybe Xaden isn't going with her on the journey. I hope I'm wrong about that. I hope this next book is her and Xaden on this big journey to solve the venin problem, both to cure Xaden, but also to maybe like defeat the venin. If it's the two of them together on a journey to solve that stuff, I think this book is going to be a lot better than book 2. If Xaden doesn't go with her and it's a journey alone, that's going to be really annoying, but I still think it has the potential to be a good book, even if it's not a good romance in that situation. But if we again have just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of Dragon School mixed up in all of this, then like I don't even know what to say. Because even the synopsis of this one doesn't lend itself to that. Like, she needs to let go of the Dragon School thing. She needs to just let it be a background thing. You put all the rest of this into the focus, so now that's the focus. That's a bigger thing than the Dragon School. You can't keep moving the focus back to the Dragon School when you have all these bigger things going on. The reader's not going to care. So that's how I felt, and it was really disappointing. Like I said, I don't like being super negative on here, and I also, I wanted the book to be good. I really, really enjoyed the first one. So this was a really, really upsetting one for me. I was genuinely upset in a way that like reading a bad book doesn't normally upset me like this, because it's just, okay, like I'll either DNF it or I won't. And if I made it through, then I guess it wasn't that bad. It doesn't usually like rile me up the way this one did. I feel like that clip of Tyra Banks from America's Next Top Model where she's like, I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. I've never in my life yelled at a girl like this. Because I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. Hopefully she fixed some of it in the next book, but this book is coming out, I think, less than a year from when book 2 came out. So because of that, I'm like not 100% hopeful that some of the problems that I thought were due to rushing the book are necessarily going to be solved, because something tells me this one was rushed too, based off of the time difference between when the 2 books came out. That's going to be all for me today, you guys. I'm going to ask again, have you read this and how did you feel about it? Did you feel similar to me? Are you gonna read the next book? How are you feeling? I'm certainly gonna be reading the next book. I will be making a video on it. I do not know if I'm gonna like it or not like it. I'm feeling very mixed. There's some of those cool plot twists. I am kind of excited to see where they go, but I am afraid that this one is also going to be in need of a lot of editing that it didn't get. But I will update you after I read it. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!